All right, welcome back to Ivory GC. Today we have the pleasure of hosting Mark Chavez, known for his expertise in navigating complex regulatory environments and driving strategic growth across diverse industries. Mark currently serves as general counsel at Applied Digital Corporation, where he oversees legal strategy for a cutting-edge technology company. Before that, he led legal and compliance functions at major organizations like Limetree Bay Ventures, PBF Holding, and ExxonMobil, guiding them through transformative periods and high-stakes challenges. With a background spanning energy, technology, and even military service, Mark brings a unique perspective to the role of general counsel. We're excited to delve into his experiences, leadership insights, and advice for the next generation of legal professionals. Mark, welcome to IVGC. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
So it's interesting to read about and learn about Applied Digital. You're doing some really interesting things in the AI space and technology infrastructure space. Can you start with tell us a little bit about what Applied Digital does and where you fit within the company?
Sure. So Applied Digital, it's a publicly traded company that constructs and manages large-scale data center facilities to provide computing power for AI workloads and also cryptocurrency mining operations. And in terms of where I fit in the organization, I'm the general counsel and recently was also appointed the chief compliance officer. So my roles are certainly expanding within the organization, and then also serve as the head of HR. So my role is getting bigger and bigger, and certainly the challenges as well.
So where have you seen the most growth within within the company, I guess within the industry at large? Obviously artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, our latest buzzwords and flourishing industries. What have you seen most recently in the industry development and how it's impacted Applied Digital?
I think the biggest thing for me is just the speed at which things move. Like coming from energy, in the energy space, projects could take decades, like literally decades. You might start a project, you may move on to another role, even maybe another role, and that project is continuing to go, and you may never see the fruits of your labor. Kind of working in technology, we can go basically from NDA to a transaction in a week, month. Like if it's a very, very fast pace. And as you can see kind of in the news, when things happen in the kind of the broader macroeconomic or the world, the global environment, those things can have a tremendous impact on kind of what you start seeing about how AI is going to develop, how data centers are going to develop, and things along those lines. So I think it's a very exciting industry. It's one where there's, I think, a tremendous amount of growth opportunity, and it's certainly one that I'm very happy to be a part of.
So where does Applied Digital fit into the bigger picture in terms of AI and cryptocurrency mining? Can you tell us a little bit about how the company operates, how it really impacts the legal function, and where you fit in the industry at large?
Sure. So I think from how kind of we fit in the AI function is that we're building these tremendous data centers currently in North Dakota that are really going to be designed to run AI compute specifically. So you're talking about when you look at a crypto data center, that's a fairly simple data center, not particularly expensive, not particularly complicated from a structural standpoint. But when you go into AI, those types of GPUs are working at a completely different level, and they require a great amount of technology to support them. So for example, liquid cooling to kind of keep them cool and allow them to kind of run in an environment that's really optimal for those particular pieces of equipment. And that type of technology behind it is extraordinarily expensive, truthfully. And it's something that really requires a great deal of expertise in order to develop. And then as that kind of leads into the legal function, what that really entails for me is when you're kind of building things like that, you're going to have a tremendous amount of legal work coming from the supply chain organization, a tremendous amount of work in terms of kind of contracts with potential tenants that you may be working on. Then there's always going to be a little bit of kind of like litigation and other things that you're going to deal with that are like on a day-to-day that affect any company. You're going to have HR matters that you're dealing with. So my day is always extraordinarily busy, and it's really never the things that I think I'm going to be doing that day that are really going to take up the majority of my time. But it is, like I said, very exciting.
So to tell us a little bit about how these data centers work. You mentioned having tenants. So who are the tenants, and are those tenants within the data center, or explain a little bit more about that aspect of the business?
So I think different companies do things in different ways. So you could have a data center that could be dedicated to one particular tenant. So if you had a hyperscaler, for example, that tenant may have computing needs that basically take up your whole data center. And I think in other situations, you may have a customer that may require, maybe you may have various data halls and they may take up maybe one or two, and you may have a different customer that could take on kind of other portion of the computing capacity that you have. So I think it's really a customer by customer and a company by company situation where it really kind of depends on how it kind of goes for you and your company.
And so are your tenants, are they of a particular profile? Do you service a particular segment of the industry, or is it generally companies that are, running AI tech?
So I think that's the goal. So these were really designed. So we built these, and then we're kind of in the process of like kind of finding the tenant that comes in and comes with their particular needs on how they're and can rent that facility from us. So as we kind of sit here today, the ones that we have operating currently are kind of on the crypto side, and those are kind of pretty straightforward. You have the kind of the crypto miners that come in, lease it from you, list that capacity, and they kind of go about their kind of their life. On the AI side, what we do is basically we're looking for like large scale, like hyperscale type tenants that can come in, and then they may have their own customers on the back end that they're basically using our data centers to run that AI compute.
Got it. Got it. So let's talk about, a little bit about your backgrounds, how you got to where you are today, and how some of your past experience is applicable to what you do for Applied Digital. Can you give us kind of an overview of the last 10, 15 years or so of your experience?
Sure. I started out at I did was judicial clerkship for a year, and then I went into the law firm of Locke Lord, which is now I think it's a Troutman Sanders Locke. So they've kind of gone through some mergers. So an AmLaw 100 law firm. I was in the energy group, and I was also in the bankruptcy group and commercial litigation group. So my expertise, frankly, was actually fairly limited. I ended up working almost primarily in dealing with environmental liabilities and bankruptcy. So it was a fairly niche kind of specialty. And then after about 6 years of that, funny enough, the one oil major that I didn't represent, ExxonMobil, was the one that approached me with a position. And their view of the world was that if you're a good lawyer, you can basically do anything that they give you. So I went from doing this very narrow thing in environmental and energy to motorsports. So I started doing F1 contracts in Europe. I started doing NASCAR contracts for them. I started supporting their technology group, kind of developing tests that would kind of support marketing claims. And I started supporting their aviation group. And then after about 2.5 years of having kind of the fun portfolio of flying around the world and kind of doing deals with airlines and Formula One teams, they said, you know what, we're going to do something different with you, and you're going to go learn how manufacturing facilities work. So then they sent me to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I supported their manufacturing facilities there, which included a refinery, a plastics plant, a polyolefins plant, integrated chemical plant. And they manufactured gasoline, aviation fuels, waxes that go into chocolate, that go into other things. And I had to learn a completely different skill set. I had to learn environmental law. I had to learn OSHA regulations. I had to really kind of deal with regulators almost on a daily basis. And it kind of then I also had direct reports as well, so I had to become kind of more of a manager in that role. And I got a little bit ambitious and decided, hey, I've been doing this a while. I want to kind of get an assistant GC title or kind of move up in the world. Exxon was fairly flat, so that was somewhat challenging to do within Exxon. But luckily, World Fuel Services, which is now World Connect, Fortune 100 company, was able to offer me a position. And then I was able to go there and kind of work on their commercial aviation team. And again, do kind of things around the world with the aviation groups, dealing with various militaries around the world, and negotiating fairly significant commercial agreements for the purchase and sale of the aviation fuels. And then they also allowed me to kind of delve into kind of contract management and building out a kind of contract management system and team with them. And then after a couple of years there, again, the goal was always to be a general counsel, and I wanted to kind of develop that skill set. So the one thing at that point I was really kind of lacking was kind of the treasury and that kind of support on the finance side. So I went to PBF, and PBF had some history with some historically Exxon facilities, so that I was attractive to them. They brought me in, and the general counsel there was kind enough to offer me not only the ability to support the manufacturing facilities, but also to support our treasury group and kind of develop my skills there. And that really positioned me really well to move into Limetree, which is now Ocean Point Terminals, where I became the general counsel of a private equity portfolio company. And then finally, the ultimate goal, where an Applied Digital was able to show enough faith in me and my skills to offer me the general counsel position at a publicly traded company, which was kind of always the ultimate goal.
That's great. So you've seen a range of companies, a range of, you've been in a variety of roles. What did you take from the ExxonMobil, World Fuel Services, the large company environments that you've been a part of, and how have those skills translated to your role at Applied Digital?
One thing that Exxon, I think, does probably better than anyone is they establish processes and procedures, and they're very methodical in the way they do business. So kind of seeing that and be able to kind of learn from that and see, okay, this is how you really develop a matrix organization. This is how you develop a process. This is how you kind of follow those processes. This is how you hold people accountable to those processes. Those things, frankly, were actually very similar to the military. So it was actually a very comfortable transition going from a law firm to Exxon, because Exxon looked very much like the Army in terms of how they did things. There was a way to do things, and that's how you did it. And that was very helpful. And as I moved to other places that had maybe a different little bit culture, a little bit more entrepreneurial spirit, where they were kind of a little bit more free form in kind of how they did business, I was able to adjust to that, but also kind of bring that in the back of my mind, the ability to kind of create process and kind of bring a little bit more structure to the chaos to kind of help them move forward.
That's so valuable. I spent some time at Xerox, and I used to joke that you had to, check with a policy before you could use the restroom, because it can be so process oriented that large organizations really do run on that. In a lot of ways, it's incredibly helpful, and it ensures quality control. And so having that exposure, definitely, that's often lacking at a smaller company that where there is more organized chaos. So to the extent that you can bring those process oriented procedures to a smaller company, it certainly can be valuable. You talked about your military service. Can you talk a little bit more about how you served and how that's shaped you as a lawyer?
Sure. It was actually kind of interesting how I ended up there. That was never something that was really in my mind, but I graduated high school, was lucky enough to get into MIT, was attending MIT. Unfortunately, my sisters were also in college at the same time, so my family didn't have a tremendous amount of means. So it was becoming financially very, very difficult for them to kind of support three children in college. So I decided to figure out how am I going to kind of pay for school. And funny enough, one of the things that MIT did for me was that they allowed me to I was a trumpet player, so they allowed me to take lessons from one of the trumpet players in the Boston Symphony. And he was saying, "Well, you're pretty good. Have you thought about like the military bands?" So I auditioned for the military bands.
Oh, wow.
The Army gave me the best deal, even though my dad was Navy. They gave me the best deal, and I went into the military and was able to pay for my undergrad and my law school while playing trumpet in the service and getting those military benefits.
Wow.
But it was so far removed from what I was doing. The first job I ever had in my life was working with a postdoc at MIT, cloning and genetically modifying plants. And to go from that to basic training was quite the change. But I wouldn't do it any other way. The Army made me a much better person. It made me a much better leader, and I think it made me a much better teammate in terms of how I kind of integrate with teams.
That's fascinating. So, through your career, you've pivoted to some smaller companies. What excites you about that environment in particular?
I tend to get bored pretty easily, and the small companies tend to be a little bit more nimble. They move pretty quickly, and they're a lot of the things, like a lot of the busy work that you may have at a lot of larger companies, that doesn't really exist. Like everything I do on a daily basis, when I was at Ocean Point and certainly at Applied Digital, I feel is meaningful. So I can feel like I can make an impact every single day. And at larger companies, sometimes, I mean, I loved working at Exxon. I could have stayed there my entire career and been very, very happy. But sometimes it's like, am I making an impact on a daily basis? Because I'm one of maybe 400 attorneys in a company that's tens and thousands of employees. And where I am now, I really feel on a daily basis that I'm really changing things and can impact the direction of the company.
And how long have you been with Applied Digital?
5 months, but things move so quickly. It feels like it's been 5 years. Time goes by.
That's fantastic. So, you mentioned setting up a contract management system at World Connect. So can you talk a little bit about what that entailed, what you learned from that experience, and how you've potentially applied that in subsequent job opportunities?
Sure. It's funny, that process has come up multiple times. So I worked at it at World Connect. I worked at it on that type of process with PBF, and I'm currently working on it with Applied Digital. And it's interesting because the contract management process is something that's extraordinarily valuable. I think sometimes people don't realize that can affect your revenue recognition. That can affect serious issues where I've been in situations where you can't find the contracts. You're not aware if you have a contractual relationship with it because people forget. Things auto renew. You end up having liabilities to a counterparty that you weren't aware of. All of these different problems that can arise. And for me, this is something that's very simple to solve, because in this technological age that we're living in, there are myriad tools that you can use to really kind of solve for this. And really the only barrier is you just need to find the right one that works for you and your company, kind of where it is in terms of the contract maturity process. And lucky enough, when I got to Applied Digital, they were already in the process of acquiring Ironclad, which I think is a tremendous tool. And it's something that we've been working on and kind of be able to roll out to the company on a company-wide basis and kind of take away all of those problems. We know exactly where our contracts are. We know exactly when they expire. We can very quickly verify who approved it, who signed it, and it takes away all of kind of the guesswork around it. And it makes you wonder why anybody ever did it any other way.
Yeah.
Because it's simple enough that there's really no excuse to not have a contract management system in place.
So can we let's stay on that for a second, because I really I have a mixed feelings about contract management systems. And
Sure.
I totally agree that they are essential in order I should say what they accomplish is essential for an organization. Everything that you just mentioned, tracking not only approvals before the signature process, but also contractual obligations after the signature process. What different tools, you mentioned Ironclad, have you used others, and what do you find? I mean, one of the aspects of those tools that I've found is that they can do so much, but they can also be used pretty narrowly as perhaps just a contract repository or just a workflow approval process, and then you can build. They take a modular approach. You can build on top of that. What tools have you used, and how have you found that they can be applied most effectively?
More historic, like in a couple of the other companies I worked in, that some of the tools were kind of customized for those particular companies.
Yeah.
Ironclad is the first one that's kind of more out of the box, let's say.
Yeah.
And then, but I agree with you completely. Like, one of the things that's been challenging more recently is we've gone through the process. We're looking at various tools that we could use for entity management. And there are tools that are very, like you said, they have like a very narrow purpose. And there's some that are almost overwhelming and all of the different bells and whistles that they have. And I think part of the key is figuring out what works for you and your company. Yeah. And luckily, like in the process with Applied Digital, working with one of my colleagues on the finance side, we've gone through a number of demos and kind of found like, hey, this is the one that hits all the sweet spots. This is the one that does exactly what we needed to do at the right price point. And yes, maybe there are these other bells and whistles that we may need when we're a $10 billion, $20 billion company. But as we sit here today, this is really all we need. And we're not going to overpay for something just to say, like, I got the Ferrari instead of the Toyota Corolla.
Yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity to talk about what your team looks like at Applied Digital, because I know in integrating or applying some of these contract management systems myself, there's a lot of room there's a lot that needs to get done to set it up initially, and then also to administer it on an ongoing basis. So do you have others within your team, or do you leverage others within the finance team that help you with that?
So we've been lucky to have an amazing administrative assistant who's kind of been working through and kind of knows that system forwards and backwards. And she's really kind of the key focal point, because I think more than anything, you really need to have somebody who understands the system, because there are always going to be questions. People are always going to have questions. And if you can direct them to one person that ends up being like the one source of truth, that's extraordinarily valuable. So she needs to stay completely safe, cannot go out and get hit by a car. She needs to be there every single day. But that person is really kind of basically the hub that makes the whole system work. And then she makes it much easier for the business people to understand how the system's going to work, and then certainly from the lawyers to understand how the system's going to work.
Got it. And so what are you using? Are you able to talk a little bit about what you're using Ironclad for in particular? Is it a repository? Is it a approval tracking system? Is it a more comprehensive workflow management tool? All of the above?
Sure.
How's it looking at Applied Digital?
But we've been kind of working through it in stages. So we've started with kind of the repository for NDAs and kind of managing kind of that system. And then we're starting to work on expanding it with supply chain in our commercial groups. And as we expand it, it's going to have our delegation of authority kind of built into it. And so that those workflows are something that we can use for audit purposes to verify, hey, this person signed off on this agreement. It's within their delegation of authority. Here's the agreement. Here are the signatures. That person's a signatory. And it makes it very easy from an auditing perspective to validate that all our controls are working appropriately as they pertain to contract approval and signature.
And then is the signed contract going into a repository that's using some perhaps AI functionality, to report on the different aspects of the contract, or is that more of a future state?
So we're keeping them in ironclad. I think it's going to be more of a future state if that we start doing a little bit more on the AI side and kind of generating those types of things. But we do use AI in other places. Like we have tools that are kind of custom built internally where we can kind of review our contracts and summarize them very quickly. I have a colleague who is exceptional at that, who has kind of built his own model. And you send him an agreement, and within 10 minutes he sends you back like this whole thing that basically summarizes all the terms, and basically analyzes it. And it's frankly amazing how much AI can speed up the work process.
Yeah. So having worked at the intersection of law and energy, what are the unique regulatory and risk management challenges facing that sector, and how have you navigated them?
I think right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind is really environmental regulation and compliance. So energy is highly regulated, and I think most significant issues I worked on while I was in energy really involved environmental matters, whether they were environmental releases, where they were significant enforcement actions or things along those lines. And when you're dealing with things of that scale, frankly, they tend to attract a lot of attention, not only from the regulator, but from the media as well. So I think navigating them ends up being very important that you communicate directly with the regulator, and you communicate frequently and right at the front end. One of the things I've found is that some companies will take the position like, look, we're not going to say anything. We're going to try and manage it ourselves. We're not going to say anything. We'll just keep it quiet. And what tends to happen is the media will speculate. Like if you don't give them the information, they're going to speculate. And then what ends up happening is your regulator reads that speculation, and that becomes their truth. So then you're working backwards in terms of, hey, instead of telling them this is what happened, they're coming in saying, this is what we believe happened, and you're having to walk them back. One of the worst examples I had was we released something and it was minimal, no harm to humans, but it was almost like playing telephone. Every time somebody told someone else, it ended up being where it was at this fatal level of release, and trying to get the regulator off that was very problematic.
Interesting.
What I kind of learned from on my end, the lesson learned was on the very beginning, call the regulator, say this is the situation, we're managing it. If it's a triage situation, just be very honest with them. We can't tell you how exactly what size it is, but we're certainly working on it. You're welcome to come out. You can work with us and try and make it more collaborative so that they know they're getting the information first. They're not having to read it in the newspaper. They're not having to hear it from other people. And then you can work as a team to collaborate on how best to address this issue and kind of get to a good solution that's good for the business and good for the regulator.
That's great. And so, you must be intricately involved in making those types of strategic decisions. Can you talk a little bit about how your executive team works in terms of kind of who you're working most closely with, how you're working on a day-to-day basis to make those types of decisions?
So at the larger companies where I worked at, where we're handling those types of matters, we had a team that was always kind of mobilized immediately, that had kind of representatives from like your environmental health and safety. You had the legal department. You had kind of the operations people represented. So you had basically all the stakeholders in the room, and they were kind of able to kind of collectively, come up with get all the information that we need, and then appoint someone to kind of be the one point of communication to the regulator. Because the other thing you want to avoid is having multiple points of communication where information is being communicated potentially differently, or it's going through various different lenses. People are trying to explain it in one way here and a different way there, and you get a confusion. So kind of keeping the communication channel pretty narrow, and being very aligned on what the messaging is extraordinarily important in doing that. And that's been something that I've kind of need to make sure everybody's in the room that you need to make those decisions, so that you don't kind of end up running around with like a chicken with its head cut off and communicating different things to the regulator that are going to come back to bite you later.
Yeah. So what opportunities and challenges come with transitioning from traditional industries like energy into roles within fast-growing tech companies?
I think the biggest thing is kind of, we talked about a little earlier, is really the speed. So when I worked at Exxon, like if you found you could do a geological find It could take you years to identify the field. It could take you years to go into development, years further before you actually got to produce. Projects that take a long time. If you're working at a refinery, you do a project, again, it could take a significant amount of time. With us in technology, like literally, I could sign an NDA on Monday and we're closing a transaction. Sometimes I've seen as quickly as 24 hours later. It could be a week, it could be a month, but the speed is so fast.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think it fits my personality better. I'm pretty high energy and I like to get things done and kind of move on to the next thing. So it's really a good fit for me personally to kind of see things moving. And you also have to move in that way because that's the way the industry is going. AI every day, there are developments, and technology more generally, there are developments. And if you're not moving at the same space as the industry, you're gonna get left behind.
So it sounds like you're a solo GC. No other attorneys within your department, or do you have others within your group?
I do. So I started as a solo attorney. I started in November, and it was just me. And then a couple of weeks later, we were able to bring on an amazing colleague who handles regulatory and real estate matters. So she's in North Dakota, and she handles kind of the issues associated with the actual building of the data center, acquiring the land, kind of doing all of those different kind of things that are associated when you have any kind of construction project. And then brought on a deputy general counsel who I had a lot of experience with at ExxonMobil, who had experience both on the energy side, which is extraordinarily important in building a data center, and then also on the technology side. So he helps us with our supply chain, our commercial agreements. And then just this past week, we had another attorney join us who is going to help with our securities and kind of corporate governance. So he's going to help me at the headquarters with those types of things. And we're going to kind of stay there for a minute and kind of see how it goes with the four of us.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll grow over time as the company kind of grows and the legal needs grow.
That's quite the development in the first 5 months of being there. That's exciting. And how have you been able to? And I'm sure this is still a work in process as you've introduced new members to the team. But how do you balance what you handle internally with what you leverage outside counsel for?
I think for me, there are certain things that just fundamentally I think need to be inside. So like when we're doing the supply chain agreements, commercial agreements, I think those things really should be internal because no one's going to know the company better than us, and no one's going to be able to provide the very specific advice you need in connection with those agreements, other than an attorney who's working day to day with the business and partnership. Because fundamentally, what ends up happening if you go outside, and this isn't a dig on external counsel, is they're going to give you a very conservative answer, generally speaking.
Yeah.
When you are in-house, you need to kind of calibrate your advice to the risk tolerance of your company. You need to understand your leverage in a particular commercial situation. So you may have to adjust how you negotiate that. And you want to get pretty efficient at doing that. And so having one lawyer or two lawyers that are really doing that day in, day out is frankly the best way to handle that. Now, when you get to things like litigation, going into the capital markets, things along those lines, M&A transactions, you really need a larger team, a lot more support. And that's really where you kind of want to go outside counsel. And frankly, we have, I think, one of the best outside counsels I've worked with in my 22 years that's really partnered with us and really provides that kind of guidance. And they're almost like an extension of the internal team because they know us so well.
Yeah.
And that's something that's been really refreshing and frankly makes my job a lot easier on a day-to-day basis.
So what have you found successful either at Applied Digital or some of your prior jobs to get the attorneys exposed to the risk tolerance of the company and involved with the business? How do you, I mean, obviously some of that will come just with working closely on these contracts, but is there anything that you've done to be proactive with getting lawyers and the legal function trained up on how the business operates?
For me, I think that risk tolerance piece is something that it's extraordinarily important to me. And like that's something that I've seen as a real big differentiator in terms of how effective you are as a lawyer, is really understanding your company's risk tolerance. So it's something I really hit on the front end. So when I make the hiring decisions I'm really hiring people that kind of think of it the same way. So it's really something I'm evaluating on the front end, being like, hey, how do you approach this? How are you going to negotiate it with it? So my deputy general counsel, he and I both came from Exxon. We kind of see things the same way. So it was very easy. So we come in and very naturally talk to them and say, what are you seeing as the hurdles in terms of when you're working on a deal? And the business is very honest with us and says, look, these are taking too long because we're having to go back and forth on these provisions. They're too long. They're too onerous. We don't have the bargaining position to really dictate these terms to the other side. We need to come up with something that's really more fit for purpose. And yes, maybe we have to assume a little bit more risk, but at the end of the day, the costs are really outweighed by the benefits that we're going to get by approaching it in this fashion. So for me, it's really hiring the right people who have that kind of same approach to the law.
Yeah. So you've led major mergers and acquisitions. What are the most critical legal considerations that can make or break a deal from a GC perspective?
It's funny with this one because when I honestly think a lot of the biggest thing that kills a deal are really the human factors. To me, it's rarely the actual legal issues or the economics. Because if it's a legal issue or it's an economic issue, I think those things tend to kill the deal pretty early on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Where when you get further down the line, what I've seen is what tends to kill it is people want to make it a win. Like, so they're kind of overreaching. They're trying to retrade the deal a little bit. And oftentimes, frankly, it's the lawyers. The lawyers want to kind of really over deliver for the client, and they end up causing more harm than good by trying to get that a little bit more out of the pie.
Yeah.
So it's really trying to get that pride, that stubbornness, that overreaching out of the deal, and really focusing on the fact that, hey, we need to try and make this a win-win for everyone. Because in most instances, you're going to have to live with that counterparty for some period of time, whether it's through warranties that you're providing later, whether it's whatever it is, or if it's in a merger situation, you're going to have to live with them in the same house or get married. You don't want to start off at a point of distrust. You really want it to be a partnership.
Yeah. So you've had experience managing global legal teams. How do you foster collaboration, cohesion, and accountability across different cultures and time zones?
Sometimes it's difficult. So like I've certainly been up at 9, 10 at night trying to set up a call with Japan and kind of vice versa. So it's certainly challenging from a scheduling perspective, but I think it's very important to, if possible, have in-person meetings, or at least leverage kind of Teams and Zoom and kind of the technology things. But I think the biggest thing in kind of creating that cohesion is really being sensitive to kind of the culture and how things are approached from your team members. I speak English, Spanish, and I spend a lot of time learning kind of the languages of the people on my team. So I speak a little Romanian, Turkish, French, Portuguese. Cool. Because something as simple as just kind of greeting someone in their native language and showing that you're making an effort to understand where they're coming from goes a really long way. And a lot of the feedback I've gotten from kind of international colleagues is that when I go into a situation, they're like, you're not the obnoxious American. You're not coming in telling me how to do things and this is the way it goes. You're really taking the time to learn, well, how do you do things here? Why do you do it that way? And how has it been working for you? So that I'm not going in and breaking something that was already working perfectly fine to begin with. So when people see that I'm trying to be a little bit more sensitive to how they do things and open to how they do things, not just kind of dictating, hey, you have to do it the American way, they tend to open up, and it really brings people together as a team.
Yeah, that's great. So you've been recognized professionally in your career. What does it mean to you to be recognized by your peers with industry awards, and how does this shape your vision for the role of general counsel?
For me, it's really humbling, and it means a lot to me because I work very, very hard to kind of get where I'm at, and I've had to move my family across multiple states to try and take a position that I thought was going to better position me for where I'm at today. So I've sacrificed a lot. So having your peers recognize you as General Counsel of the Year 1 year and putting me on like a power list another year, that means a lot to me because there are a lot of extraordinary lawyers in the world. So for the peers and these groups to kind of recognize my accomplishments means a lot to me. And frankly, it really drives me to try and be better because I want to feel like, hey, I want to prove that I deserved to get this. And so I want to kind of deliver on that and kind of just continue to grow and really deliver for the companies I work for.
So what advice would you offer to young attorneys or law students who aspire to eventually serve as general counsel, particularly in highly regulated or fast evolving industries?
I think it goes back to the conversation we had about kind of risk mitigation. One of the things that I've noticed is when you are in a good C-suite team and you kind of walk in and you kind of see them having conversations, a lot of the times you don't know who is who. You don't know who the GC is. You don't know who the CEO is. You don't know who the CFO is. And I think what they're really looking at is, at the end of the day, what you're all doing, whether it's from the legal side, the financial side, or the operational side, is you're mitigating risk. So at a very fundamental level, you're all risk mitigators. So a lot of young lawyers kind of think of themselves as, I'm a litigator, I'm a corporate attorney, I'm an environmental attorney. But whatever kind of attorney you are, fundamentally what you're doing is you're looking at a risk, you're figuring out how to mitigate it, and you're giving advice on that to try and mitigate that risk. And the same thing, the CFO is doing the same thing. So if you start looking at the world in that way, in terms of risk and mitigation, and then calibrating that to what your company's doing, I think that's how you become an effective executive. So it's a little bit of a different kind of paradigm than when you're kind of in private practice. And sometimes you can get very caught up with, I'm getting a fact pattern, I need to get back a very black and white answer on what the answer is. When you're in-house and you're general counsel, it's not that black and white, because the answer at Exxon is not the same answer at World Connect, is not the same answer at PBF, because the risk tolerances are different. So your advice really has to be calibrated to your specific client in that way.
And I've said in the past that it's almost impossible. You never, or very seldomly do you eliminate risk. Right? And it's not about eliminating. It's about understanding the risk, lessening the risk to an acceptable degree, getting your arms around it, and understanding it from a variety of perspectives, like you said, financial, operational, legal, and there's there are ways to allocate risk among counterparties and your own company, but to the extent that you can get your arms around what the risk is and how are we managing it, it makes ever more the successful business outcome.
For sure. Like, I wish things never went wrong, but that's certainly not the world we live in. So like and I think sometimes some companies get caught up with trying to look for who's at fault, and sometimes no one's at fault. You made the best decision you could make at the time, and unfortunately it didn't go your way. And 99% of the time it might go your way, and we can't just focus on that 1%.
Well, it's been an absolute joy having you on and hearing your perspective on building a legal team. You've made a lot of progress in 5 months at Applied Digital, which is great to hear about. Wish you all the best in the progress of your company, your role, and we'll be following you from a distance.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.